Hello, I am Ansley Scott, an environmental health specialist with the Arkansas Department of Health. Today I want to discuss with you all, the residents of Lonoke County, endocrine disruptors, and the potential for exposure in Lonoke County, Arkansas. Listed here is an outline of what we will discuss today. We will start with a basic overview of the endocrine system and its normal function and role in the body. Then we will move on to how endocrine disruptors affect the normal functioning of the endocrine system. Next, the routes by which people can be exposed to endocrine disruptors will be discussed, along with the effects that these molecules have on the human body. The potential for pesticide exposure in Lonoke County will then be addressed. We will then end our discussion with mechanisms and measures used to prevent future exposure to these chemicals. The endocrine system is a collection of ductless glands that have the ability to secrete hormones directly into the bloodstream. One of the most important portions of this system is the hormones that are produced by specialized glands, which have the ability to travel to other portions of the body and act on target organs. While hormone activity is a slower process than that of neuronal signaling, the effects that these hormones have are often far more long lasting. The endocrine system is important for nearly every function in the human body. These functions include regulation of blood pressure via vasopressin activity on the kidneys, growth of bones due to growth hormone, and production of milk by the breast when stimulated by prolactin secretion. Endocrine disruptors are chemicals or molecules that have the ability to essentially impair the production and activity of certain hormones. They can disrupt the normal functioning of the endocrine system via four possible mechanisms. Endocrine disruptors can mimic natural hormones that are made by the body, which allows them to bind and block the site at which the natural hormones would bind, resulting in the absence of the expected effect by the hormone. They can also work by blocking the action of hormones, which also prevents the downstream signal that is expected. Some of these molecules work by changing the message and essentially the function of the hormone. They can work as antagonists, blocking activity, or agonists, enhancing activity. The final way that these endocrine disruptors can function to cause impairment is by stopping the production of hormones or hormone receptors, completely shutting down the signaling pathway that is needed for the endocrine system to properly function. Exposure to endocrine disruptors can be via direct or indirect sources. Direct exposure can be via prescription drugs and molecules in plants. Indirect exposure can be via foods that have been treated with endocrine disruptors like pesticides and fungicides. Food is thought to be by far one of the major sources of endocrine disruptor exposure. There are several ways or routes that people can be exposed to endocrine disruptors. A fetus can be exposed via mother's blood or breast milk. Infants, children, and adults can be affected by these molecules due to ingestion, inhalation, or skin exposure. Chemicals that are commonly found in many consumer products and foods are able to act as endocrine disruptors. General categories of molecules will be discussed here briefly. Dioxins. These are not commercially produced, but are the byproducts of a number of industrial processes such as chlorine synthesis. Pharmaceuticals. These mainly consist of oral contraceptives and other drugs that are designed to intentionally alter endocrine signaling. Bisphenol A, also known as BPA, is a component in plastic that is used in the packaging of various foods. These have been found to be hazardous to fetuses, infants, and young children. Phthalates. These are the component in plastic products like tubing and vinyl chloride that provide flexibility. They are also found in fragrances and household products. Phytoestrogens. These are naturally occurring and found in plants. They possess estrogenic activity. Finally, there are pesticides, which we will discuss the exposure to in Lonoke County. Pesticides are synthetic molecules that are toxic to fungi, plants, or animals that are detrimental to cultures. They are designed to protect cultures by targeting offending critters and plants as specifically as possible. Generally, these are able to function as endocrine disruptors in conditions of chronic exposure. Endocrine disruptors have the ability to affect the body in a plethora of ways due to the number of functions that the endocrine system is essential for. For pesticides, one of the most notable systems affected is the reproductive system. It has been found that in males, pesticides have the ability to impair spermatogenesis, which is the production of sperm, reducing semen quality and ultimately decreasing fertility. Spontaneous abortion and birth abnormalities have been associated with pesticide exposure in women. Delayed conception of pregnancy has also been observed. A significant number of studies have linked exposure to pesticides with hormone dependent cancer occurrence, most specifically breast cancer. Human fetuses, infants, and children have been shown to have increased risk when exposed to endocrine disruptors compared to adults, with effects that may not become apparent until adulthood. Fetuses and infants are extremely vulnerable to pre and postnatal exposure to endocrine disruptor pesticides via maternal fat mobilization and breastfeeding, lending to effects that may include long term impacts on intellectual function and delayed effects on the function of the nervous system. Endocrine disruptors are present in numerous products we use and consume, such as foods and plastic materials, and exposure can occur in various ways, such as ingestion and inhalation. But Lonoke County has a significant number of farms, both agricultural and livestock. The use of pesticides is common in farming, whether on a large scale or a small family farm. Residential proximity to agricultural activity has been shown to be a factor in the developmental abnormalities that are associated with pesticide exposure and the subsequent disruption of endocrine functioning. Pesticide runoff, leaching into foods that they are used to treat, and exposure of livestock to pesticides in Lonoke County all put the residents in this community at risk for impairment of the endocrine system. There are a number of approaches that can lead to prevention of future exposure to pesticides, or at least decreased exposure. Farmers are often focused on preventing crop damage and may shirk or not even be aware of the health effects of pesticides. Integrated pest management field school training can be used to improve this. An astronomical amount of pesticides have been exported from the U.S. on an annual basis, a significant amount of which were forbidden or were restricted. Increased pesticide regulatory measures are essential to improving this data. Another suitable alternative to consider is organic farming, the crops of which contain fewer pesticide residues than conventionally grown crops. Furthermore, this organically grown produce may contain more nutrients and may have improved protein content. Finally, natural pesticides, which are not synthetic or engineered, can be used to decrease pesticide exposure. They are thought to be less toxic but have an inherent issue of potentially not being potent enough to truly control pests. Let's summarize what has been discussed here today. The endocrine system is essential to normal functioning of the human body and plays a role in almost every system that the body uses. Endocrine disruptors affect the function of the body via several mechanisms, all of which essentially impair hormonal signaling. Humans can be exposed to endocrine disruptors via several mechanisms, two of which include food and vertical exposure from mom to baby. Exposure to pesticides is able to largely impair the reproductive system in both males and females. Lonoke County has a significant number of farms, and residents are at increased risk for exposure due to sheer proximity. Future exposures to pesticides can be improved and prevented via measures that include farmer education. Future exposure to pesticides can be improved or prevented via measures such as farmer education and natural pesticide use. Included on the next two slides are the references used to compile this presentation. Thank you for your attention.